Hi, I'm Roxy Keller, and I am baking my way through the Great British Baking Show Challenges. It's week 7 of 2017, and the reason I'm wearing red and green is not because it's Christmas, but because it's Italian week. And today's episode is on the technical challenge for this week, and that technical challenge is to make a margherita pizza. And some people on the show were thinking that this might be easy, but they did not give the bakers a mixer or a rolling pin, and they didn't tell them how to assemble. Margherita pizza has to have, the chunks of mozzarella cheese, and then they bake it, and then they put on fresh basil afterwards, that sort of thing. So it was a challenge for them on the show, but because I've seen the show, I know what the tricks are for making a decent pie crust. And I am not going to be making a margherita pizza. My husband and I both like meat on our pizza, and I make pizzas all the time, but I have not made a dough from scratch. I know, that's crazy, right? It's actually not that difficult, but sometimes when you're making pizza, you're just in a hurry, so I use a prepackaged dough mixture, give it some warm water, wait 5 minutes, and then spread it out to make the pizza dough. So that is the little bit of a challenge. Is I'm not going to use my stand mixer. I'm going to mix it by hand. I'm going to knead it by hand, and then I'm going to roll it out by hand. And it turns out that when I make my homemade pizzas, and I do make my dough, but I use a packaged flour mixture, yeast mixture, I spread it out by hand anyway. So I've always done that. I've never actually used a rolling pin to spread out my pizza dough. So let's get started. You can find this recipe on the Great British Baking Show website, and you can just Google Prue Leith's Margherita Pizza, and it's P-R-U-E-L-E-I-T-H, and Margherita is spelled like the island, M-A-R-G-H-E-R-I-T-A, not like the Mexican tequila cocktail. So you can find the recipe, and you'll notice again that I am only making the dough from that recipe. I have a pre-made sauce that I use on my pizzas and on my spaghetti, and I have some left over, so I'm going to use that. But let's get started on the dough. Another variation for my pizza dough from Prue Leith's recipe is that she calls for live yeast, and I don't have any live yeast, so I'm going to use my platinum yeast, and I'm going to prove it in 100 milliliters of water that is about 110 degrees. The recipe calls for 10 grams of live yeast, and the packet that I'm using is about 7 grams, so it's probably more than I need, but it should be fine. So I'm just going to set that aside while I get the flour and other ingredients ready. In a medium to large bowl, I need 200 grams of all-purpose flour, half a teaspoon of fine salt. It's said to sift the flour. I didn't do that. I don't really have any lumps in my flour, so I think I'll be fine. To the flour salt mixture, I'm adding 2 tablespoons of olive oil, a pinch of sugar, 2 pinches, Now I'll add the yeast with the 100 milliliters of warm water. I use this instant read thermometer to make sure that I have the correct temperature. You need it high enough to activate the yeast, which is about 105, and you don't want to go over about 135 because that can kill the yeast. It'll die certainly at 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I just need to add a little bit more water. It says 115 milliliters, and I've already added 100, so I may not need more than about 15 milliliters to pull this dough together. With the ingredients mostly wet, I'm going to start using my hands. Okay, so I think the dough is together. It's quite shaggy, this is what they call shaggy. And it would be nice to auto-lees, which means to let this sit and let the flour absorb the water. But the bakers were given only an hour and a half to complete this whole challenge. So I'm just going to go ahead and start kneading it. And it says that I have to knead for 10 minutes. So I'm going to set my timer and knead this on the countertop for 10 minutes. Then it will sit in a warm place to rise for about 45 minutes. It does say to sprinkle the countertop with flour, but I don't want to add too much flour because then it will get too thick and tough. Wow, that was a long time. Put a little bit of oil on the dough ball. Okay, I'm going to cover this with cling wrap and then set it on my heating pad that gets up to about 77, 78 degrees and let that rise for about up to 45 minutes, and it should double in size, so that's what we're hoping for. About 20 or 25 minutes into that time, I'm going to turn my oven on to 475 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm going to start warming my spaghetti sauce. So, see you then. It's been about 30 minutes and the dough needs to rise just a little bit more. So I have the oven preheating to 450. I often don't like to set it quite to 475. It just seems too hot. And I have my spaghetti sauce warming up on the stove top. So my spaghetti sauce has red sauce, tomatoes, ground beef, and some chopped onions and bell pepper, but I like to get a little bit larger pieces of bell pepper and onion. We really like that. And I'm going to add some pepperoni. So I'm going to cut a few rings or pieces of onion and bell pepper to go on as toppings. I did wash my bell pepper with baking soda and vinegar. I found that that just feels like the best way to remove any pesticides or bugs or dirt, and my vegetables always seem so clean after I do that. My dough has doubled in size at least, so I'm going to punch it down and then spread it out into about a 13-inch circle. Put a little bit of oil on your fingers. It makes it much easier to spread it around. Punch down. And on the Great British Baking Show, they put their pizza straight onto the oven rack, but I like to use this pizza pan that has holes in it, and so it's easy to put in the oven and pull out, but allows it to be well cooked. On the Great British Baking Show, Prue Leith wanted a very thin crust, and she wanted it, after it's baked, to, when you pick up a triangle, that the end bends down. I'm not so sure. I mean, I guess it'll do that, especially with mine, because I'll have a lot more ingredients on it than she did, but she seemed to think that that was the most classic pizza crust. But of course, here in America, we have all kinds of pizza crusts, and you can make it however you like. We like ours pretty thin, which is what she liked, so that matches. Let's see what size that is. That's pretty good. That's 13 inches. Slightly over. It's pretty round enough. And I do like to bake my pizza dough for about 5 minutes before I put on the toppings. That way I'm sure that I have a nice skin on the dough before adding the sauce and the other toppings. So I'm going to put that in the oven for 5 minutes. Okay, the pizza dough has got a little bit of a skin on it now, so I can start assembling. I start with my spaghetti sauce. Again, this has ground beef and usually a mild Italian sausage. So it's a pretty high meat to sauce ratio. We don't like a lot of sauce, and it's just too wet and too tomato-y. So we have a pretty high proportion of meat in our sauce. Now I'll add some pepperoni. We definitely put on more meat than most of the commercial pizzas. one or two pieces of this pizza could be a whole meal. Add just a little bit more of this thinly sliced onion. Bell pepper. If you've ever wondered about my two dogs that you often see in walking around the kitchen, I have two Australian Shepherds. This is Sheila. This is Bindi. Oh, there you go. They like all vegetables. Let's try it the other way. Up. 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 No, Sheila. Bindi. Sit. Up. They love vegetables. Okay. Finally, the mozzarella cheese. Okay, that's going to be delicious. So that will go back into the oven at 450 degrees for about 10 to 12 minutes. Here it is. So I only baked it for 10 minutes, and then I turned on the broiler for maybe a minute just to give that cheese a nice toasty color. And I'm going to let that cool off just a little bit and then cut it up, ready to eat. I was looking at the recipe again and noticed that this was supposed to be enough dough for two, which means they wanted it really thin. I made it the thickness that we like, so. Placing it on a rack will help it cool a little more quickly. Okay, so the pizza is ready. It's cooled down a little bit so it can be cut, and my husband always cuts the pizza, so here he is to cut it. This is my husband Chauncey, and yeah, let's cut.
All right. Go lefty. All right, I think we're separated.
All right, select your piece.
Take this piece. Which one would you like?
I'll take this one. Okay. So it was supposed to bend. I guess mine bends like it's supposed to. Yeah, go ahead and give it a try.
All right.
Is it hot?
A little bit.
You can redo that if you want.
It's really good. No, that's fine. Tasty. Just like you always make. Very good. Yeah, delicious.
Do you like the dough better, or is it about the same as what I usually do?
It's comparable
Yeah, it's pretty
to
much
what you usually do.
it.
Which I mean, seems like the same texture, the same, you know,
Taste and everything.
yeah, everything.
Okay, well, let me just finish off and we can have lunch. Thanks. So time for lunch. And thank you for watching. This is the end of this episode. And next we have the Showstopper Challenge, which for Italian week is something that they call sfogliatelle. I think that's how you say it. It's not spelled at all like that, but I'll have that in my notes so you can see how it's spelled. It is a pastry that is rolled super, super thin. I think you use a pasta maker to roll it out into really long strands and to a really thin texture. And then when there's somehow you roll it up and twist it so that it looks like a lobster tail, and you can fill it with different kinds of creams and fillings. So it will definitely be a challenge. So stay tuned for sfogliatelle. And please subscribe to my channel, and thank you for watching. Share with your friends. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.